Okay, welcome everybody to our final weeks of SANCS 2026. Today we have a super exciting lecture with Olaf Kolkman, who I will shortly introduce before he will take the stage and give us the lecture for today. So Olaf is an executive level advisor to and spokesperson of the Internet Society, where he strategizes and advises on technical and policy issues. And so for well over 2.5 decades, Olaf has been actively engaged in the intersection of internet technology, society, and policy matters, in particular those related to security and trustworthiness of the internet. So under Olaf's responsibility, NLNet Labs made a significant contribution to global internet stability through research and developed DNS software and is deployed worldwide, which is just an example of one of the things that Olaf has been doing. And today at SANCS, he will provide a lecture on the internet way of networking. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. 750 people, that's quite impressive, I have to say. Yeah, my name is Olaf Kolkman. I work for the Internet Society, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the Internet Impact Assessment Toolkit. You will see me going back and forth on the screen a little bit. I understand you cannot ask questions directly, but put them in the chat and Isis will convey them. So yeah, let's start with talking a little bit about myself and the Internet Society. Isis' introduction was quite good. I'm Olaf Kolkman. I live and work out of the Netherlands, and I've been working for the Internet Society for a little over a decade. My history is in internet technology, and I slowly made sort of a transition from internet technology to that intersection of internet technology and internet policy. I work for the Internet Society, and maybe you've heard of us, maybe you haven't, but our mission is basically promote the development of the internet as a global technical infrastructure, a resource to enrich people's life and a force for good. We want the internet to be everywhere, and we want those that use the internet to have a safe and secure experience. We've been founded in 1992 by, in essence, the inventors of the internet. We're a global charitable organization, and we're mission-driven. Let's see, we are a bunch of members, 165,000 members across the world as of this morning. Usually organized as chapters and special interest group, so members flock together and do local work. And we are supported by 81 organizational members that are members that work either in internet infrastructure, do business on the internet. We have some platforms as members. We are mostly paid through, or funded, I should say, through the sales of .org domain names. Everybody who buys a .org domain name, some of that proceedings comes to us, and that's how we fund our work. We're organized in basically two elements: a foundation that does a lot of grant making in the world, and the Internet Society that is more of where we have the policy and technological expertise to do our advocacy work. What do? We try to make sure that people everywhere have access to an affordable and reliable and resilient internet. It needs to be a good experience. We want to bring people the capabilities to take charge of their own connectivity if they don't get it from a vendor. And we defend an open internet, an interoperable internet, so that people have equal opportunities to create, to innovate, and build communities online. And that's what I will be talking about today. What are the properties that create the circumstances so that people have those abilities, the abilities to create, the abilities to innovate, and to build communities online? And once people are connected, we want them to be safe and we want them to be secure. So we advocate for an internet that looks and feels that way. Um, so one of the things that we do is we look at commercial and policy decisions that might take us away from an open internet that is secure and trustworthy. I am not going to do a lot of preaching about the internet and what we do exactly. Should you want to know a little bit more about us and what we're doing, for instance, this year, then we have an action plan that you can download. Since we are talking about, the South African group, I do want to point out that we have a large and active community in Sub-Sahara Africa. Here you see a map of all the chapters that we have in the region or in the southern part of the African continent, and you see basically these dots everywhere. Should you be interested, scan the QR code or go to the link on the screen, and you can find one of our chapters there and join them as a member. Becoming a member of the Internet Society Global is easy. One of those individual members, you just sign up. You're a member, doesn't cost anything. If you want to join a local chapter, feel free to do that. They are independent units that subscribe to our mission and basically do the work locally. One of the things that I like to say about this is at the Internet Society, everybody thinks globally but acts locally. And that's the way that we get things done. That's the way how we bring networks to the people who need the networks, that we create a policy environment that allows those networks to work, and we create the environment in which people can be safe and secure online, right? So that's a little bit about us. That's I would almost say that's the marketing talk. But we're now going to talk a little bit about the internet and the internet way of networking. So, internet way of networking. That's this part. What is this internet way of networking? It's an idea that we created a couple of years ago because we know that the internet is incredibly successful. It's used by over 4 billion people. There's still 2 billion people that are unconnected, but everybody we if you are connected to the internet, you take part of in the digital society. And since our societies are becoming much more digitized, it's very important that everybody is connected to that network. And the internet is a global infrastructure that has worked for the past, well, I would say 3-4 decades already. And we wanted to understand as Internet Society, what are we actually, advocating for? What are the properties that are so important that the internet is actually what it is? What makes the internet, and what is worth protecting about those properties? And those we wanted to cast not in technical terms, but derived from the technical architecture. So based on the technical architecture, we came to a number of critical elements or properties of the internet that led to its success, and if we maintain these properties, to a healthy evolution. And it's not only the technology, it's not only the what, it's also the how. How do we approach things? How do we think about the internet? How do we think about global connectivity? How do we think about how we manage this? And that combined, we combined in what we call a paper called the Internet Way of Networking. And what the thing about this paper is that Now we have that, and I'm going to explain you all about the substance of it. Now we have this internet way of networking. We can use it as a tool to do assessments of proposals on how the internet evolves and how the internet, what the impact is of policy proposals of the internet, on the internet, and how ideas can shape the internet in a positive or negative way. In other words, what we're doing is with this internet way of networking, we can create a toolkit for impact analysis, just like you would do an environmental impact analysis when you build a new building or a new road. You can use this toolkit to do an impact analysis, an internet impact analysis, when new policies are proposed or new ideas are developed or evolution is taking place in the internet, and you want to understand whether that's going to have a positive or a negative impact on the internet, right? So we could cut this short, and I could give you this QR code and you could read it. But I don't think that's why we're here. What we're going to talk about is first is sort of the core of this whole idea, which are the 5 critical properties of the internet way of networking. And we call it the internet model. An accessible infrastructure with a common protocol, open architecture of interoperable and reusable building blocks, a decentralized management and distributed routing system, common global identifiers, and a technology neutral and general purpose network. Well, that's nice, but it's also very abstract. So let's dive into that a little bit. So first, I want to ask you a question, and you don't have to answer this because it's a little bit impractical with so many people to get an answer. But think for yourself. If you think about the internet, what do you think of? I'm going to give you a second. Just write it down on a piece of paper in front of you. Think about it for a second. So I bet that a number of people will have written down something like the internet is my experience, is the way that I interact with it. It's being on a Zoom call, or it is, for instance, using WeChat or WhatsApp or Signal or something else by which we communicate. It's Facebook or Instagram. Those are all applications. Some other people might have said it's the connecting tissues, the tissue that allows us to connect everything together. And that for me is the way that I think about the internet. The internet for me, if it boils down to it, is a network of networks that together provides global connectivity, right? How does that work? Let's have a quick look at how that works. So when I say I think about the internet, I think about it as a network of networks. And what does that mean? Well, some of you might be, for instance, at home now. And when you're at home, you usually connect to an internet service provider. So this is you. You're sitting here at home with a laptop. Is this showing? I don't think this is showing. Huh? Let me quickly check this. Yeah, it is showing. This is you, little person here, is sitting on you're watching this. And you're connecting to a laptop, to an internet service provider. It could be through your mobile phone, over the airways. It could be the computer that is sitting in your house that is connected to a modem or to a fiber. And so you reach a network here. Usually your mobile provider or your home provider. That network is connected to yet another network. And that network is connected to yet another network. And somewhere on another place on the net, on the internet, which is a network of networks, there's me. And I'm connecting through my internet provider, which is called Freedom. My network in my house connects to that. And suddenly we have a connection. We have what we call an end-to-end connection from you to me. And that's how we can communicate. And how does this work? Well, what happens is that when we do a video call, the application will chop up the information that that is transmitting the video, that's transmitting the sound, that is transmitting this image over here. What will happen is that the application will chop that up in very small packets. See it as an envelope. If you want to send a book through the mail, then you rip up the pages, you put them in an envelope, you send the envelopes via the mail to another person. And the mail system works right quite similar. You give it to your local postman. Your local postman brings it to the main post office. The main post office brings it to yet another post office. The post office in my country sends it to the post office in your country, and so on and so forth. And at some point you will get a bunch of envelopes that each contain a page out of that book, and you can compile the book again. It's essentially standardized packets, standardized envelopes almost, that are sent over this this network. The fact that we use a common protocol, common ways to chop up this information in little pieces, in packets, in envelopes, that's a common protocol. And because we all use it across the internet, every network on the network uses the same protocol, the same procedures, the internet works. So we agreed globally, we're going to use a packet format called the Internet Protocol packet format, and that's how we send information around. We use a common protocol. So if you go back to that slide that I just showed here, then an accessible infrastructure with a common protocol. Now, what does that accessibility mean? Well, the accessibility means that if I am creating a new network and I connect in some way to the rest of the internet, I'm part of the internet. The ability to become part of the internet, become part of the global internet by just one contract, namely the contract between, let's do another color here, the contract between this network here and this network here. That's the only contract for which I have to sign an agreement, and from that moment on, I'm part of the internet. In fact, if you buy a subscription from your internet provider, you're becoming part of the internet. Only one contract. That's profound. The second critical property that I showed on that screen is an open internet, open architecture of interoperable and reusing building blocks. It's perhaps a little bit more abstract. But when we started, let me just look at you directly when I explain this. When we started the internet, the internet was basically you could log into a terminal, you could send a text-based email, and that and maybe go to a chat box or something, but that was about it. The internet was not designed to be web-based or to have the web or to have these Zoom calls. The internet was designed basically to provide connectivity. And people came up with ideas that they matched together. They used standards to do that. Last week, there was an Internet Engineering Task Force meeting in Shenzhen, China, where about 1,500 engineers came together, partly online, partly in a room, to discuss standards, building blocks by which new applications can be made and old applications can be maintained. Open building blocks and not a central type of big architecture. There's nobody in a room that says in 5 years the internet should look like this. But the internet over the past 45 years has evolved on an almost daily basis and is still evolving. And that is because that open architecture of interoperable and reusable building blocks. Let's go back to these properties. So what I'm doing is I'm explaining these 5 critical properties from sort of technical first principles. I hope you've got that. So decentralized management and a distributed routing system. Let's go back to my drawing of the internet. This drawing here. Well, this is actually much more complex. There's a network of networks, and in fact, there are about 70,000 of these networks that are all interconnected in some way. Now, if you are a person here sitting connecting to this network and you want to find somebody else on the network, you want to go from here to here to that person, then the internet needs to find its route. It needs to find how to connect from one instance to another. There is no central place where that is managed. The routing of this system is highly distributed and decentralized. A network, any network on the internet will have an idea where the other 70,000 networks, how they are connected to them. There's a routing protocol, as we call it, that is constantly exchanging information on where to find specific addresses, IP addresses, internet protocol addresses that are used to identify connected machines. There's a constant update about information where to find people that are connected or machines that are connected on the internet. That's highly distributed, and there's no centralized management that does that. There's no internet SAR. And that means that the internet can adapt very quickly to changing circumstances. If there is a fiber cut, for instance, somewhere on the network, then the internet will create the opportunities to route around that. So while previously traffic was maybe going from here to here, if there's this fiber cut in this location, I hope everybody can see what I'm drawing. I'm sort of in the middle of the screen. Then the traffic that was first going directly will now find a way around this brokenness. That decentralized routing system allows resiliency. So resiliency is sort of a built-in property of the internet. So let's go to the next one. The next part of the critical properties, and that is what we call the common global identifiers, right? Common global identifiers is what people use to find information on the internet. When I showed you a picture earlier of where to find our annual plan, that had a so-called URL. You are aware of URLs, I presume. And a URL usually contains a domain name. And a domain name is something that is globally unique. A domain name is something like www.isoc.org. completely unique and globally shared so that everybody knows that if you type in that name, you end up at ISOC. If you type up the name of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, HCSS, I think it's .nl, but I'm not 100% sure, you end up there. So I think that is relatively easy. Let's talk about that last thing, technology neutral and general purpose network. As I said, the open architecture allows continuous innovation. But it also means that the internet is not fixed to do something really, really good. It was not designed to do one thing really, really, really good. It was designed to do most things just sufficiently good. And it turns out that the way that we use the internet, we can do most things sufficiently good. That technology neutralness is a very important property to maintain. You might have heard of net neutrality. That's that technology neutralness of the internet, that you don't optimize it for one particular application. You are not optimizing it to do video really well, but then you cannot send messages anymore. No, you want to do both. You want to send both messages and you want to do video. You want to watch cat videos, but you also want to telephone or make a video call with your mom and dad or your children or maybe your grandparents. So it's those 5 properties, these 5 that are on the screen that have a technological basis. They come from the architecture. And those define sort of the internet. Voila. I would say that's almost it. If you look at policy proposals that come in and you take these 5 critical properties and you look at what the impact is on accessible infrastructure or on common global identifiers or the open architecture, you can see that how the internet changes. And I think of the internet as of these critical properties as a Jenga tower. You know, the game with the little blocks that you pull away? Well, if you remove one of these properties or a sub-property of these properties, then the tower might not immediately collapse. But if you pull away sufficiently, suddenly the internet might not be the internet anymore. The tower has collapsed and you cannot rebuild it anymore. So these are the things that we are looking at very carefully from the Internet Society's perspective. If there are policy proposals that actually impact these 5 issues, then we're changing the infrastructure. Then we're changing the network of networks. And when we do that, we might lose the internet altogether. We might lose the ability to globally communicate. Pause. That's not sufficient. Because if you work with the internet and you look at this, you would say, well, there are so many things that might not change these critical properties, but there's also many proposals that change the way that we interact with the internet, that make that the internet changes in a way that I don't like to use it. And so we figured these critical properties are not sufficient to look at the internet and the effects on society with policy proposals or technological evolution alone. We need to take something else into effect as well. And that's how we came up with what we call critical properties. Sorry. The critical properties is what I just talked about. The critical properties are needed to have an internet in the first place, but they're not sufficient. If you want an internet that that is nice to work with, you needed to have certain, we have some goals for it in mind. And those goals are that it's open, that's globally connected, that's secure, trustworthy, and it's for everyone. And those terms are not completely random. If you look at the goals that policymakers set for the internet, it's usually open, transparent, global, free, all those type of things you hear a lot. Why we chose these goals, open, globally connected, secure and trustworthy and for everyone, is because that's our mission statement. And now we ask ourselves, what enables an open internet? What enables a global connected? What enables a secure? What enables a trustworthy internet? And what enables it to be for everyone? So we have now a conceptual model of critical properties and what we call enablers. And I will just briefly go over these enablers because they're the conversation that we need to have to go in depth is much longer and much harder. But suppose that people have proposals about confidentiality and how confidentiality can be should be broken for certain policy goals. Then it is these critical properties and enablers that will help you to analyze and understand what is happening. What is the impact of the proposal on the ability to make these goals? So let's go into them quickly, and then I am going to leave it at that, and then we probably have a little bit of time for Q&A. And I realize really that this is very abstract. So I would recommend that you go back and follow the link that I shared earlier if you want to know more about this. Let's look at that first goal. An open internet allows people and organizations to mix and match technologies without permission, without the need for asking for permission, and with minimal barriers. This is related to these building blocks, to the building blocks nature of the internet. Without the building blocks nature of the internet, you cannot make it open in the first place. So you need to have that critical property in place in order to get to openness, but that's not sufficient alone. You want to keep that permissionless innovation in place. You want to be able to adopt software that you get. You want to be able to build on the material that others have made. You want to have an open environment in which people can contribute. An open internet is an accessible internet. People can not only connect to it, they can contribute to it, which is, I think, very important. So unrestricted reachability is an enabler for open. People that have access to the internet can reach all over the globe and get ideas and get knowledge and get experiences from all over the globe. That enables innovation. And in order to do that well, there's also something like having available capacity. A lot of people in the world have internet connectivity, but at a speed by which they cannot make a video call. Now, I don't think that a video call is the ultimate barrier, but given this course, for instance, the fact that you can connect and see me gives openness to knowledge. And if you don't have the capacity to watch me or hear me at this point, this knowledge will pass you by. And this will be posted on YouTube, I understand, later. So this will be made available in an unrestricted and reachable way. That's openness. It allows for innovation. We need the internet to be globally connected because that's inclusivity. If we fragment the internet, if we don't have an open internet that has an internet that has geographical restrictions, then we are creating inequities across the globe. We're enlarging digital divides if we do that. Increasing connectivity of the internet makes it more valuable for every participant. There's a description of that which is called McAfee's law. The amount of nodes in a network, as that grows, the value grows by the square of it. Easy unrestricted access is an enabler, unrestricted use and deployment of internet technologies. You can pick and choose, you can use those building blocks, and the collaborative development, management and governance make that it is globally connected. The ability of stakeholders to be involved in its management is incredibly important. And that's why, for instance, the conclusion of the World Summit of the Information Security, the World Summit on the Information Summit review last year in the UN in December was so important. States in the world recognized yet again that the management of the internet is a collaborative a collaborative thing between stakeholders. It's not only the governments, it's not only the companies, it's the technical community, it's the academics, it's civil society, the governments and the private sector that collectively have to manage this internet experience. If the internet is not secure, then it's worthless. So what we need is data confidentiality. That's yet an enabler for this purpose of security. You need devices and applications to be secure. You need integrity of information, of applications and services. You want to be sure that when you download a tool, it's not a piece of spyware. You want to be sure that if you use software, it's not full of bugs and people can exploit those. So security is an important part, and we need to think about the enablers that make that happen. Now, you can already see that, for instance, there's a little bit of a tangent between openness and security, because the openness, the ability to create your own tools, also means that hackers, and I mean the malicious hackers, not the benevolent hackers, but that hackers can create tools that that can be used in attacks, right? The open nature of the internet means that people can do malicious things as well. So you can see that there is a tension between both enablers. And that's why when there are policy proposals or technical approaches, you look at this through this lens and try to identify at least the trade-off. So you can have that conversation. If I make this a little bit more secure, I might lose a little bit of openness, but that provides security, and that's the policy decisions that you then have. That's the tussle that you identify that you need to talk about. Trustworthiness is that fifth goal. Trustworthiness is about meeting expectations of users, reliability, of resiliency. You have to be able to rely on the internet. If you do your daily business, if you interact with the internet on a daily basis, you have to make sure that you can count on it. So reliability, resiliency, and availability, those are the enablers for trustworthiness of the internet. If you wake up tomorrow, you want to be able to send that message to your boss or check in into the bus, or do anything else for which you need the internet. If that breaks every day and you cannot rely on it, you're going to look for different ways to do your business, and you won't use the internet anymore. Accountability, very important for trustworthiness. This speaks to the accountability of companies. This speaks to the accountability of processes that govern us. And finally, privacy. You have to be able to be private when you engage in the net. If you cannot be private when you engage in the network or with the internet, and everybody knows what you're doing, you won't be free moving and you won't trust your engagement. You will hold back. And again, these are lenses to look at proposals and ideas, right? So let's summarize this. I've um, I shown you a toolkit. That toolkit consists out of the internet way of networking that provides you critical properties. Those critical properties, you need to have an internet in the first place, and they derive from sort of first principles internet architecture ideas. And then secondly, we identified 4 goals: open, globally connected, secure, and trustworthy, for which we have enabling properties, enablers. So if you have an issue or a change or a policy or a development, you can look at that through that lens. You look at what is the impact on the critical properties? What is the impact on the various enablers? And once you've done that, you can have a sensible discussion about the potential impact on the internet. And so this provides you with a tool to do policy analysis, to get a deeper understanding of what is happening. What I forgot to add to this slide is actually a link to our webpage, because we maintain sort of a repository of these type of analysis on our webpage. If you look for an internet way of networking, if you do that, type that in your search engine, and you add Internet Society, I'm sure you will end up there. And with that, I think, exhausted my material. I could talk about a lot of these things for a long time, but perhaps using the next 15 minutes for questions is a good use of our time. So, Isis.
Yes, thank you so much for that really insightful lecture. I'm sure the students appreciate it. They've been asking some pretty critical questions. So let's see if we can get through a few of them. I've tried to group them a little bit. There was one question or 2 questions that were quite similar or touched on the same topic about neutrality. So I'll read them both and maybe we can answer them together. Namely, if the Internet of Technology is neutral and general purpose, why do dominant platforms still shape how it is used? Does true neutrality exist in practice or only in theory? And then the second question was, how can this framework safeguard neutrality while still supporting emerging technologies like AI-driven platforms?
Ooh, tough questions. Yeah, there's a lot of shaping of our environment, of the internet environment by big platforms. That's true. And I would say that that is not a threat. That would be a too strong word. But what we need to be careful of is that we collectively maintain the ability to choose between technologies. One of the most important things I think that is an enabler for that is openness, right? The ability to have digital choice depends a lot on the ability to have standards, to have to be able to choose a vendor based on standards. You can move around from one vendor to another. And of course, this is not always in the interest of big companies. They will try to get you using their services, and then it becomes very hard to move. So for me, it's very important to think about, and specifically if you are, for instance, procuring for government services or for your company, is what's your out? How can you make sure that you standardize your own environment in a way that you can take up your stuff and move it to another provider? And that's difficult. If you look at various conversations in the Netherlands, for instance, this is a hot topic, usually summarized with the phrase digital sovereignty. But that digital sovereignty is about the ability to have a choice. And the ability for that choice you have when you have a neutral network. It's not designed for one thing. So as long as the internet is neutral, you can move from one service to another. And as long as those services have a relatively open way to describe their interfaces, you can move from one service to another. For those who work with technology and work with cloud technology, you might have heard, for instance, of Kubernetes, which is a way to manage Docker containers in the network. If you want to think about how to move from one cloud provider to another, that might be a way to think about this. How can I use my Kubernetes setup to move from one cloud provider to another? And what are the features that cloud provider offers that are very addictive, but very hard to walk away from? So you actually, when you deploy things on the internet, you have to think about those things. And open standards help with that. And procuring for open standards helps with that. It's not a magic bullet, but this is the way that you could use this toolkit also to have an understanding of where am I with openness? What am I buying into? I'm not quite sure if that answers the question, but that is, for me, the decentralization and maintaining that is perhaps a way out of being captured by big technology firms.
Okay, maybe we can build on this by kind of looking.
What was
Sorry,
the
go
AI?
ahead.
What was the AI question?
It was how the framework can if it safeguards neutrality while still supporting emerging technologies like AI-driven platforms.
Yeah, so this is exactly the same. AI-driven platforms are currently looking to be very centralized. There's only a handful, maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen of companies that really have the money to develop these large models to train them. We have to think about collectively, how do we, decentralize this? And I don't have the answer. I'm not an AI specialist. But being able to run your models locally, for instance, would already be a step. To have open models that you can pull from the internet, run on your own machine, do your own inference, and not rely on others and not spread your data to others. But these are the hard questions of our time. And again, I think that thinking about openness, about decentralization, about standardized interfaces, that those are all things that will help us making sure that we're not captured by specific vendors or specific technologies.
And maybe we can build on this with another question that was quite similar, but it was looking at what this entire trend or movement towards or away from centralization will do with innovation and innovation in the tech field.
The trend away from, sorry.
So essentially, the question asks that this movement towards centralization by larger platforms, be it Google, Meta, or other AI-driven platforms, what are the longer-term effects of this movement on innovation?
Um, I wish I had a good crystal ball. Again, these are difficult questions. What does the future look like? Um, I, I, there's definitely a power dynamic. If you can buy the industry, you can buy the industry. That's an economic thing. If you can buy the capacity to do more, you automatically do more. You make more money. Um, but again, I think that openness, transparency, accountability, those are all tools in our toolbox to make sure, and the building blocks, make sure that we can still have new innovative ideas elsewhere. That not everything is done by the big companies. Um, I think in terms of AI, that might be a little bit more difficult, given the capital intensity of having to train data. That's an expensive proposition. You need a lot of memory for that, and a lot of strong parallel processing. Um, so that's capital intensive. But good ideas are not capital intensive. Good ideas are there. So I do think that, and maybe that's naive, maybe that's a little bit idealistic, um, but I actually think that protecting decentralized and open environment will allow for that innovation to happen.
Okay, well, we have gotten quite a few questions that are asking you to look in your crystal ball because I think people see your expertise and are curious as to what your insights are. So I'm going to ask the next question and you can see how far we get. But they're asking if you had to define the minimum conditions for keeping the internet globally interoperable over the next decade, what technical and governance decisions do you see as non-negotiable?
Um, the short version of that is we need to protect those internet critical properties, those 5 properties. If we start pulling away at those properties, then we might critically impact the internet. Things that we are currently very concerned about is the ability to have confidential information on the internet. One of the things that we find very important at the Internet Society is the ability to use encryption on the internet, so that others cannot say what we say to each other. That is under threat. Obviously, there are tensions between that, but between confidentiality. But it's such an important encryption is such an important tool for everyone, and for the safety and trustworthiness for the internet, that that needs protecting, and that's one of our key advocacy things, advocacy approaches. What else? There are many things. Just look at our action plan. There's a whole list of them, but I would say it's very important that people are able to connect. We have 2 billion people that are not connected to the internet at the moment. I do think that those people are at the wrong side of the digital divide, and we should be able to pull them in. If we're not pulling in those people, we're doing a lousy job as human society, because nowadays, if you are not connected to the internet, you are not playing you cannot play your part in digital society. So that's very important, and the questions that I have there are: is satellite connectivity going to be the only way that we can do that? I hope not, because there will be a limited amount of players that be able to shoot satellites into the sky. So you will be dependent again on big corporations in order to get your connectivity. In some cases, that is not a problem whatsoever. The way that we think about this is we want to enable communities to provide for their own connectivity. So alternatives continue to offer alternatives to what is around there. I think that's very important. Make sure that the network of network remains that network of networks, and that what is happening on the application layer only loosely influences what is happening on the application layer, so that at the network layer, so that the network providers do not control what applications are successful and which are not. I already talked about technology neutral networking. That's one of those critical properties again. That's the network neutrality discussion that is going on. Yeah, there's many angles that we can go to, but let's stick to this.
All right, then I think we have time for one more question, also kind of building on this, and it's looking specifically at the critical properties that you mentioned. So which one of these critical properties, when weakened, which of them would most critically undermine the internet's role as network of networks?
That's actually a very difficult question. Gosh, I don't. Let's stare at that picture for a moment again, because I don't really have an answer directly. So, if we lose a common protocol, if we don't have a common protocol anymore, we cannot talk to each other. Frankly, we are in that state a little bit because we have IPv4 and IPv6. If you haven't heard of this yet, too late to explain now. But the internet is going through a transition from an internet protocol that could connect 4 billion users to an internet protocol that can connect a trillion times a trillion times a trillion types of users. And we're running those together, and that's enormously costly. But as a global community, we are heading in the direction where we say we want to connect everybody. This is the way that we want to end up. And so we're following that path. Suppose that somebody comes with a new protocol that says, we can do specific things better. That might break the internet. Because if we don't have a common protocol anymore, we cannot talk to this 6 billion people on Earth. Open architecture of reusable building blocks. If we start to fix the architecture and it cannot evolve anymore, it will rot. That will break the internet in time. If we stop having a decentralized management or a distributed routing system, if some central authority can determine how networks interact with each other, how they set prices between each other, then we break that in some way. And traffic patterns might be inefficient. If we lose common global identifier, if we have two DNS routes, and ISOC.org means something in one side of the world and it means something different in the other side of the world, the internet is broken. If it's not technology neutral, not general purpose, we stop innovating again. So which one? You tell me. We identified 5 similar Jenga blocks that if you pull them away, the tower might collapse. And it might not be the first one you pull away. It might not be the second one you pull away. But the tower might collapse at the third one you pull away. And which one that is, I have no idea.
I think that's a really nice metaphor to use to wrap up this lecture. And I hope that the students were able to have a good takeaway as to all the important things that you taught them today. So thank you so much for this lecture. We are out of time, but I'm sure that the students have many more questions for you.
I'm putting my email address on the screen, or no? Yeah, it's kolkman@isoc.org. should you have questions, feel free to mail me. I realize I'm saying that to 1,400 people now. Do give a reference to this lecture.
All right. Well, I'm sure the students really appreciate it. Thank you one more time, Olaf, for your contribution and your insightful lecture. The comments have been super enthusiastic. So thank you so much for all the students. We will see you in a little bit for the second lecture of today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Olaf.